Chapter 5. Jewish choral music in the great European 19th century synagogues. The fifth in a series of podcasts on the history and nature of Jewish choral music. At the beginning of the 19th century, we find for the first time an ongoing choral tradition of art music in European synagogues. For nearly 2 millennia, the soundscape of a synagogue had consisted primarily of rhythmically free chanting of prayers and lections in traditional modes. Any choral singing had been informal and pre-literate. The notable exceptions in the 17th and 18th centuries that we described in Chapter 4 were individual rare cases. But now professional level choral singing, which could rival those of the neighboring churches, became a fixture in many synagogues in major urban centers. So the question is, what brought about this change? This was a time of major changes throughout Europe. Innovations in technology were enabling faster and easier transportation over long distances. More efficient manufacturing and mass production of goods in large factories with assembly lines. The ability to inexpensively produce books and newspapers in huge quantities and make them available to large numbers of people, resulting in a greater awareness among the middle class of what was going on in the world. Innovations in agriculture, as well as transportation, meant that more food was available to more people at less expense. Innovations in medicine meant that people were living longer and healthier lives. Many people were more willing to put their faith in treatment by a doctor rather than in prayers by a priest or a rabbi. Urban life was where it was happening. Many people left their farms or small towns and flocked to the large cities in search of a better life, enhanced by technological innovations, the availability of the latest medical treatment, employment in a factory, and access to a daily newspaper. The philosophers of the Enlightenment declared that reason should be the primary source of authority, in opposition to absolute monarchy or the fixed dogmas of religion. The philosopher John Locke proclaimed that all men are born equal and with the rights to life, liberty, and the ownership of property. In 1785, Friedrich Schiller wrote a poem, An die Freude, which contained the following radical and revolutionary egalitarian line: Alle Menschen werden Brüder. All men will be brothers. And the original version of this line was perhaps even more radical. Bettler werden Fürstenbrüder. Beggars and princes will all be brothers. In 1789, the citizens of Paris stormed the Bastille prison. They overthrew the monarchy and established a republic. The National Assembly abolished the feudal system and all privileges that had been enjoyed by the clergy and the aristocracy. On August 26, 1789, the French National Assembly issued its Declaration of the Rights of Man and of Citizen, proclaiming equal rights for all, even for Jews. All men are born and remain free and equal in rights. No person shall be molested for his opinions, even such as are religious, provided that the manifestation of these opinions does not disturb the public order. The egalitarian ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and brotherhood, were catching on throughout the continent. In 1808, Napoleon declared, "At the end of this period, under the influence of the various measures undertaken with regard to the Jews, there will no longer be any difference between them and other citizens of our empire." Now, after Napoleon was defeated in 1814, and many of the monarchies were restored, some of these human rights were revoked. But many people were not willing to return to the status quo. Throughout Europe, people revolted time and again, until eventually the rights of citizens were reinstated. The Enlightenment created its tensions within Jewish communities. There were some Jews who ignored the call to leave the ghetto and remained content to reside in the insular world of their faith. There were also radical reformers, such as Rabbi Abraham Geiger, who sought to make Judaism less dissonant with the religion of his Lutheran neighbors. Sabbath services were held on Sundays. The language of the service was German, and the traditional chant was abolished and replaced with Lutheran hymns. There were some Jews for whom Judaism was an obstacle to the good life. They converted to Christianity. That was the path for the renowned German poet Heinrich Heine, who converted from Judaism to Protestantism in 1825. He cynically called his reluctant conversion the ticket of admission into European culture. This was also the path of composers Felix and Fanny Mendelssohn, grandchildren of the first great Enlightenment rabbi, Moses Mendelssohn. Even after emancipation, the Jews of Europe were subject to anti-Semitic attacks. Perhaps the most famous verbal attack came from the composer Richard Wagner in his essay Jewishness in Music, published in Leipzig's Neue Zeitschrift für Musik in 1850 and then reprinted in 1869. Wagner wrote, "Who has not had occasion to convince himself of the travesty of a divine service of song presented in a real ethnic synagogue? Who has not been seized with a feeling of the greatest revulsion, of horror mingling with the absurd, at hearing that sense and sound confounding gurgle, yodel, and cackle, which no intentional caricature can make more repugnant than is offered here in full, in naive seriousness?" Such attacks spurred many Jews to modernize the synagogue service, to make it less dissonant with Christian culture. The first reformers in early 19th century Germany abolished the role of the cantor and awarded his role to the rabbi. The music of the service would henceforth be provided by men and women singing chorales in the manner of Lutheran services. The constitution of the Hamburg Temple, dated December 11, 1817, specified, "There shall be introduced at such services a German sermon and choral singing to the accompaniment of an organ." As an example, here is a chorale that was featured in the Rosh Hashanah service at Berlin's Reformgemeinde Synagogue on Johannisstrasse. This recording was made in 1928 by members of the Johannisstrasse Synagogue with the hope that smaller synagogues, which could not afford a choir and organ, would play these recordings during their services. The original hymn was composed in 1657 by Georg Neumark for the Lutheran Church. The Reform rabbis had provided a new text. A less extreme reform was proposed by synagogue musicians such as Salomon Sulze in Vienna, Louis Lewandowski in Berlin, Israel Lovi and Samuel Naumburg in Paris, Israel Mombach in London, David Nowakovsky in Odessa, Michele Bolaffi in Livorno, and in Munich, Max Georg Löwenstam, Emanuel Kirchner, Israel Meyer Jafet, and Meyer Kohn. These men composed music for and conducted four-part choirs of men and boys that complemented the traditional solo artistry of the cantor. Now turn to chapter 5b.